Welcome to EdYouToo.
Mesopotamia is a place where some of the oldest civilizations on Earth began. Its laws, culture, and governments helped create many ideas we have today. Mesopotamia was between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, an area often called the Fertile Crescent because of its shape. In order to understand the key people and events in Mesopotamia, there are three ideas that were important in Mesopotamia: farming, laws, and taxes. Okay, I know that these ideas sound dull, but they affect your life today. So let's talk about them in the present first. Let's say you go to the grocery store for your favorite tasty cereal. If the market is out of it, you might choose to get something else. But if the market is out of all food, and out of it often, you would find another way to get food, and you'd look for a way to always have food. People formed civilizations to make sure that they had food, because when many farmers came together, they had a better chance of having food when they all worked together. This is why farming brought people together in Mesopotamia. When many people live near each other, they need to agree on certain things to get along. Laws tell people which side of the street to drive on, while on the way to get that cereal, protect their property, and help people settle arguments. In order to have laws, people need to agree on them, and there needs to be a power that can make sure those laws are followed. Taxes are a part of laws. They pay for roads and bridges needed to deliver that tasty cereal, as well as military services people need to protect them. Since taxes are money collected from many people, there are strong opinions on them, so laws can change about them often. Before getting back to that cereal, let's get into Mesopotamia. People had started farming and were living in groups near what's now known as the Persian Gulf. Around 5000 BCE, cities were built with ziggurats, or temples, for religious ceremonies, walls for protection, canals, or small rivers built by people for transportation and watering crops, markets for trade, and homes. Farmers around the cities used the canals, markets, and wanted the power of the cities to help them trade their crops and to protect them. The cities and the farms around them created city-states. They shared the same language, religion, and were ruled by the same royal families. Ur and Uruk grew from towns into big cities, and other cities grew in the region of Sumer as well. And the Sumerians were the first group to have cities in the region. These city-states were ruled as part of empires with many cities at times, and sometimes those cities ruled themselves, depending on the period of time. Sumerian society used bala taxation, or exchange, to pay for building, military, and government. Cuneiform, the writing used in Mesopotamia, was used to record taxes, which was people giving crops, livestock, and goods to the government. Taxes were such a big part of Sumerian government, tax record tablets are by far the most often found writing from them. Taxes collected were different for each citizen. The larger the land a person farmed, and the more things they shipped and received from other places, the higher the tax. Tax collectors were priests or nobles and were part of a higher social class, meaning they had the most power, money, and respect in Sumer. Kings and ruling priests were at the top of their society, and power shifted often, making one more powerful than the other. In early times in Sumer, droughts, or not enough rain, and floods often damaged crops. It was believed that these natural disasters were caused by angry gods punishing the city-states. Priests were thought to be able to talk to the gods, and people turned to them hoping to keep their crops safe. At that time, priests were the most powerful people in Sumer. When canals and drainage systems that helped them get rid of extra rainwater were good enough to protect food crops from natural disasters, kings became more powerful because those systems were built because of the kings. Enemy armies also came more often, so the military became more important to the citizens. Better control over water and a need for protection from others eventually gave kings more power than priests. As Sumer grew, a larger military was needed to protect city-states. Governments needed to control a large amount of land with many city-states, and wars to gain even more land were all expensive, which meant higher taxes. Certain people that collected taxes were also stealing. So some of the tax that was meant to go to the city was taken by those officials. It didn't take long after taxes were created for taxes to be hated. The citizens of Lagash in Sumer became so angry, they overthrew the rulers and got a new king, King Orkagina, who changed the tax system and harshly punished those that stole. It wasn't all good news, though, as this lasted for less than 10 years before the city was invaded. The Sumerians had a large influence over Mesopotamian civilizations. Their writing system, religion, and inventions were used all over Mesopotamia for thousands of years. Even after Sumer became less powerful, others used much of Sumer's religion, culture, and writing. Its laws were also collected into one of the most famous law documents in history. After Sumer, the Code of Hammurabi was written in Babylon as a record of all the laws, actually carved in stone, displayed for everyone to read. Not everyone, or even most people, could read, but still, having the laws in writing made them clearer to people. These laws tried to cover every situation like property, work, trade, divorce, crime, and even slavery. There were 282 laws. The idea that laws needed to be public and that they needed to have written consequences for crimes has influenced the laws of today. Thankfully, laws have gotten better since then. These laws punished slaves, women, and people of lower social status much more harshly, and many of the punishments were quite cruel and severe. If someone stole your cereal, they could be killed as a punishment. There are many groups and leaders in the Mesopotamian region. Its groups and rulers grouped together and split the region over time. Sumer was the earliest collection of city-states, with Amorites moving into cities in Sumer. Then Sargon of Akkad conquered most of Mesopotamia, and the Akkadian Empire ruled most of Mesopotamia for about 300 years. Babylonians and Assyrians also controlled the region at times. In early Sumer, priests and kings competed to be at the top of the social hierarchy. Once kings had become the most powerful people in society, the Mesopotamian social order remained the same. Kings were the most powerful, followed by priests, then wealthy merchants, scribes, writers of records, and government officials, craftspeople with farmers below them, and at the bottom, there were enslaved people. If you lived in Sumer, what your life would be like would depend upon who you are and what your social class was. Royal families lived, well, like kings. They wore the fanciest clothes and jewelry, and both men and women wore makeup. Homes were palaces. They were 3 floors made of clay and bricks. They had windows, which were quite expensive at the time, and they even had house musicians. They ate the best foods available, 3 meals a day with meat, when most people had 2 made of mostly grains. Boys in royal families had tutors and learned to read, and in Sumer, some families also taught the girls to read as well. Kings were in charge of keeping order in their cities, protecting them, and were thought to have divine power given to them by the gods. In order to try and gain and keep power, families arranged marriages for their children, which were often the families of religious leaders or other royal families. There was a middle class of merchants that traded and sold things and lived in smaller brick homes. Some of the boys went to school if they could afford it, and the girls might help with the business and learn to cook and maintain a home. School taught reading, math, and other specialties, but learning cuneiform was quite hard. Students that misbehaved could be whipped by their teachers, and you thought your teacher was tough. They wore similar styles of clothes as the wealthy, but the fabrics and materials were different. Merchant families that were middle class in Sumer could become wealthy merchants if they were successful enough. And this wasn't always possible in many places throughout history. Arranged marriage was normal in all of Sumerian society, so marriages were decided by parents. Parents paid a dowry, which is a large amount of money, to families of boys when their daughters were married. There were all kinds of laws about dowries. Divorce could mean a refund, and if a husband died, the wife could receive her own dowry back. The lower status, poorer people were one of the largest groups in Sumer. They wore wool clothes, which was less expensive but not as good in the hot climate, and had homes made from mud and grass with flat roofs. None of the children in poor families went to school because they could not afford it. Most were farmers. They ate a morning and an evening meal. Both were mostly vegetables. It was possible for people to move up, either through marrying into a richer family or by success in selling goods. It was also possible to move down. People getting into debt could be forced to become slaves, which was really, really bad. Slaves made up one of the largest groups in Sumer. They were often people that were part of armies that tried to invade. They were bought and sold, and some sold for less than what farm animals cost. Most of them worked in homes of wealthy people, and some worked to build buildings. Some of them were slaves for part of their life, and some were allowed to marry with the permission of their owner. After Sumer, Babylonians, Akkadians, and Assyrians took over the region. They gave fewer rights to women. Outside of Egypt, these rights would remain just about the same for thousands of years. Women were no longer allowed to own property or attend school. Poor families with debt or those unable to pay dowries sometimes sold their own wives and daughters into slavery. Whew. One of the most important and famous stories in literature came from Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And part of the idea of an epic is that it's a really big, long story. Some of its ideas are still used in movies today. Let's tell the Epic of Gilgamesh in 5-ish minutes. And warning, spoilers ahead. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, but not just an ordinary king. His father was a king, as that's usually how it works. But his mother was a goddess. Gilgamesh was a handsome and strong king that built giant ziggurats and walls for Uruk. He was also a cruel leader that upset many of his citizens that prayed to the gods for help. The gods decided to create a friend for Gilgamesh, Enkidu. Enkidu was born in the forest, and he heard about Gilgamesh's cruelty towards the people of Uruk. Enkidu went to fight Gilgamesh, and when they fought, it turns out they were equally matched. After their fight, Gilgamesh saw Enkidu as strong and wise, and they became friends. Enkidu was a conscience for Gilgamesh, teaching him about good behavior and getting him to be kinder to the citizens, as the gods had planned. Enkidu grew bored and missed the forest, so Gilgamesh decided to take them on an adventure to kill Humbaba, a demon in a spooky forest. This is where they have the part before the quest where Enkidu says, "I think that's a really bad idea." They visit Gilgamesh's mother, the goddess Ninsun, who says, "I think that's a really bad idea." And even though Gilgamesh is the only one that thinks that it's a good idea, they go anyway. Gilgamesh and Enkidu walk through the spooky forest and find Humbaba, the demon, and kill it with the help of the gods. Thanks, Mom. Then they make a raft from the trees in the forest, and just so they can show everyone how tough they are, they bring the head of Humbaba back with them. When they get back to Uruk, everyone is super impressed with how tough they are, including the goddess Ishtar, who was really super impressed. Ishtar wasn't subtle about her feelings. She asks Gilgamesh to marry her in front of everybody. Yeah, it was too much too soon, but Gilgamesh doesn't exactly let her down gently. He tells her in the meanest and loudest way possible that he thinks she's gross. Ishtar was angry, to say the least. Ishtar is angry at Gilgamesh, she's angry at Enkidu, she's mad at the whole city-state. She is really, really mad. Ishtar goes back to the gods and unleashes their hungry pet bull upon the city that eats almost everything in the city for 7 years. And after 7 years, Gilgamesh and Enkidu aren't putting up with that anymore. So they have another fight scene and kill the bull monster. And to make the story longer, Enkidu throws the leg of the dead bull at Ishtar, which wasn't such a good idea. Once again, Ishtar is angry, and now all the other gods are upset that their favorite pet bull was killed too. They decide that they are going to make Enkidu die, and suffer a bit before he does. Enkidu becomes ill and has visions of the underworld, where the dead go, and tells Gilgamesh about it and then dies. And then is reminded that he himself is going to die someday. But the story continues on. Gilgamesh decides to go find someone that will live forever to prevent his own death. And then, of course, they're very far away. He has to get past 2 scorpion monsters, but talks with them to get past them. That's new. He still needs to cross the river of death, though. Just when we think Gilgamesh's monster-killing days are over, he sees stone monsters in the mountains and kills them all. Turns out that was a bad idea, as those stone giants were going to help the boat's captain, Urshanabi, to cross the river of death with Gilgamesh. Urshanabi tells him to cut down lots more trees, and they get across the river and find the immortal couple. And of course, the immortal couple tells him his quest is a really bad idea. They also get angry with Urshanabi for bringing him, telling him that Gilgamesh stinks and to go get him a bath, and they banish him. The immortals then give Gilgamesh a chance to become immortal. He fails, but the wife tells him out of pity about a plant that restores youth. After yet another long journey, Gilgamesh gets the plant, decides he's going to bring the plant back to Uruk and share it with everyone so that they can become young again. And he takes that bath he's been needing. While soaking in his bath, a snake steals the plant, leaving Gilgamesh a bit older, Urshanabi banished, and the quest is a big fail. Gilgamesh is really sad, and he mopes back to Uruk. Wait, that's the end now? Well, in the end, Gilgamesh understands that everybody dies, which includes him, and that things he does during his life are the only things that could live on. The biggest change in the story isn't in Uruk, it's within Gilgamesh himself. People call Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization, as its ideas and influence spread to many civilizations for thousands of years. Their improvements to farming by creating canals for irrigation were built and improved upon by future civilizations. The different systems of taxation showed others the benefits and problems with taxing citizens. Laws created and written in the Code of Hammurabi were often used as a guide for others creating laws. Many civilizations that followed Mesopotamia had the benefit of looking at their successes and failures, and even movies today use some of the same themes that were written in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, next time you're eating cereal and watching an epic movie, you may have the people of ancient Mesopotamia to thank for it.